Very good morning. This is Katja Zinsenich speaking from MHP. We have like 1 more minute to go, and I'd like to ask someone from the participants to confirm that you can hear me properly and that you can see the screen. That would be perfect. If someone could confirm that. Okay, awesome, thank you. That sounds good. Perfect, and hopefully you can already see the screen, and I'm switching to the presentation in a bit. All right, then again, a good morning to everyone. Appreciate that you are joining this early. I can be pretty relaxed because here in Germany, Hannover, it's 2 p.m. So it's already in the afternoon. But you guys, I know you are pretty early over there, 8 a.m. I guess, if you are in Atlanta and around Georgia. So thank you everyone for joining. Again, this is Katja Zinsenich speaking, and I'm very happy that we as MHP, a Porsche company, were asked by the GACC, especially Mr. Wannemacher and Mrs. Raffaela Hatba, to inform you about the GDPR regulation. GDPR is a regulation that we want to bring you some information on in this 1 hour presentation. So it's all about the basics. Very good morning. Changes and challenges around GDPR. And Raffaela, if you want to say something in the beginning, you can. I give you the word if you like. If not, we can really use that 1 hour. So I can really use it and need it. Then I can start immediately if you want to. All right, I take that as go for it.
Katja?
Yeah.
Ja, my name is Christiane Newman. Und ich kann auch in Deutsch sprechen, oder ist das besser in Englisch?
Both works.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the participants. We have only German participants.
I speak in English.
No, we have,
I'm actually.
We only have,
Yeah.
from DAXA we also have Americans.
Yeah. No. I'm here in the Charlotte area, in Charlotte, and actually I'm working with the company which is called Orion Governance, and they are actually a global leader for GDPR, and yeah, so that is of interest to me. I'm working in finance, so you know I'm just participating to see, you know, yeah, just for my own interest.
Okay.
But I just wanted to tell you that I'm actually in a company who is doing that project or that product right now, you know. So
Okay.
so I see. I'm very interested in that now, you know.
All right.
As
Perfect.
that came
Yes.
up.
Okay. Yeah. GDPR regulation went live the 25th of May, basically, or was set in effect 25th of May. And we as MHP, we are, you can see that from the disclaimer, we are not allowed to do legal consulting. That's not what we are providing. We are actually providing management and IT consulting, but we have a lot of customers where we support in the GDPR area because adaptation of processes and IT systems is required. You will see that in a bit, and that's why we have a lot of background related to that too. But when we work with our clients, it's important that our clients also bring to the table their legal consulting partner or legal advisor. So we are always working hand in hand regarding that topic. All right, then without any further ado, I will start and To myself, I'm working for MHP since 2012. I have been working in the US for the last 3 years for our office in Atlanta. Mr. Sven Köhlen is on the line from MHP as well. He is our main contact in the US for this topic. You will see his and my contact data at the end of this presentation. We will provide the presentation also via GACC, and there will be a recording of the session available as well. Let me come to the meeting rules first, because not only because it's that early, but also because we are a larger group. Please mute your phones, microphones, and if you have any questions, please hold back and ask them at the end. That makes it a little bit easier to steer through the presentation. For sure, in case you don't get anything, if there is an issue in understanding me or my, as I call it, German English, which is a mixture of German and English, for sure you are. Feel free to interrupt them. All right, so key takeaways for today are we are going to hear about the basics of GDPR. What is GDPR? What is that regulation all about? You will learn more about the key changes and challenges that companies need to face, and companies that we are supporting as well in this topic. And you will hear what every employee needs to take care of when it comes to GDPR in their daily work. So 3 main chapters: basics. There is an example of an OEM and what this company needs to deal with related to GDPR, and as said, GDPR at the workplace. So in the first chapter, we will learn about the new regulation. We will also have a quick look into what the media says. We will see who is affected, who are those who are affected by GDPR. Also, what are the rights of the people who are affected, what data is affected as well, and what are the consequences for companies. We will touch base on that too. There are some buzzwords out there that you might have heard about. So there is the right to be forgotten, or the important 72-hour breach reporting process. Also that there are high fines related to the whole topic now. You might have heard that you can only collect personal data if you have a legitimate purpose for collecting the data. And in general, the concept of data minimization is now more important. Then transparency is an important topic. So it needs to be transparent how and when and where you are handling personal data. And also you have to be able to provide access and information on where and how you are storing or handling personal data, if you are a company, for example. And the very last topic on that page is the consent topic, which is very important. So in case you handle personal data of a natural person, you have to have their consent now, that you are basically allowed to handle the individual's data. So on this page you can see what the GDPR in general is all about. So the regulation, the EU General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is a regulation of the European Union, and it standardizes the rules of how personal data is being handled, especially within companies. So please use your phone in case you don't speak. That makes it easier for everyone to understand. Thank you. Yeah, it regulates the personal rights of all the people who are affected, which are basically natural persons, natural people. The whole regulation was set in place May 25th of this year, so just recently. But we will see later that rules and regulations around the handling of personal data have been in place before.
Yeah, sometimes it's one of those things like, okay,
again, please mute your phone if you're not. In general, the law gives greater importance to the whole data protection topic. So for example, management is now fully responsible. And that is very important. You have way higher fines of up to 4% of the world's consolidated annual. Okay. I hope everyone is still able to understand. We have some people who are not on mute.
So on this
page, you can see that GDPR has been in place before. So there has been already data protection rights before. The Federal Data Protection Act was handling the topic of individual personal data. But now, through the GDPR, which has been set at the end of May, the regulation is more strict because now any and all information related to data is covered with that regulation. And now the difference is as well that with the GDPR, it's sufficient for a company that the company only has the legal or actual possibility to identify a person by combining data entries, like name, email address, their VIN number, which is the identification number of the car, or IP addresses. So if they combine different data and they can identify a person through that, this is already sufficient to the GDPR that you fall under the regulations of the GDPR. So as said, GDPR gets also more and more attention by the media. You might have heard about all the discussions around Google and Facebook, who are for sure handling a lot of personal data, and you heard about them adapting or having to adapt their privacy rules. And yeah, here in Europe, it has been all around the media for sure, because not only big companies are affected, also medium-sized companies, and even like if you have sports groups, etc., who are handling the data of their sports members, that's also falling under the GDPR. And these companies and or groups need to be able to provide information about what personal data they compile and collect, how they're handling it, etc. So not only for companies, this is a big topic, but also for groups, that sports groups, etc. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the topic itself. Well, basically, companies have to distinguish different groups of natural people. As said, GDPR affects everyone, every employee, and every one of us, because we, as individuals, see that in a bit, we all hold personal and individual data. And there are different groups of natural people, and these need to be distinguished and also handled differently by companies. You can see that employees, as well as business partners, children, also prospects, customers, etc. These are all affected groups of people by GDPR. And these groups have different rights. And the main rights can be seen of these with I hope you can still hear me. Okay. I hope you can still hear me, because someone muted the participants, and for sure I get muted then as well. But I guess you can hear me now. Okay, perfect. Alrighty. And then I resume the presentation. Thanks for doing the general mute. We have to general unmute and later, which makes it easier for everyone to understand. All right, so these are the general rights that a natural person has now under the GDPR. It's the first one is the disclosure and information. So basically, natural people can request from a company to get information about what personal data the company has, holds, and for what purpose. Also, correction can be requested, which means if you see that as a natural person that you have moved and you need to change your address, this is then one of your rights to get your personal data changed. Also, deletion, or the right to be forgotten, is a very important right where you basically can request that in case there is no more legal basis for the storage of your data, you can ask the company to delete it, and it needs to be deleted then really from all their IT systems and out of all their processes. Then there is the right of limitation. So in case there is no more legal basis for the use of the data of a natural person, again, the data needs to get deleted, but also the data can get limited in that case where you say, okay, I only want you as a company to handle my data when it comes to sending out marketing information and or newsletters, etc. But please no longer use my data for tracking purposes. Then there is the right of data portability, which means that, for example, if you are related to, or if you are dealing with one car dealership and you are moving out of state and you want all your data to get transferred to that new dealership, you can now officially request that. Usually companies are maybe not that fond of doing this, but now this is one of your rights as a natural person, and you can request that. And last but not least, there is the disagreement. So if you have given your consent at a certain point, and you now no longer want your data to get processed by the company and used for example, advertising purposes, you can disagree to the use of the data, and your consent is thereby deleted. So in general, companies can group the affected groups of natural people into three main groups, let's say customers, prospects, suppliers, as well as employees. And on the right side, you see the different data categories that all fall under the topic of personal data, what can be personal data, and quickly do a deep dive into these categories and see some examples. So, for example, all work-related contact and organizational data, that's especially important for employees. That's what is categorized as personal data. Also, contact and identification data. Also, if you have, in a company, if you're handling employee photos or even customer photos because you are having trade fairs and or events and collect photos, that's also personal data. For sure, IT usage data. So if you collect IP addresses or handling user IDs, position data, especially for us as a company who deals with also OEMs and automotive companies, this is an important topic because movement profiles can be set up when you have connected cars in use, and or that's also relevant for telecommunication companies. On the right side, again, you can also see that a VIN number, which is the identification number of your vehicle, the unique identifier of your vehicle, that's also a personal data. And some more on this slide. For sure, obvious things like credit and bank details or contract details, as well as for employees' compensation and time management data, that's all sensitive and personal data. This is to make you aware of where you are handling personal data, and you can already see it's quite a bit, and all of us are when working in companies, in touch with personal data and handling those. We have an example of personal data and of particularly sensitive personal data on this page, because usually people tend to think, personal data, that's the name, the email address, your street address and stuff like that. But for sure, also your medical history or if you are related to a union or your religion, stuff like this, is very sensitive personal data. And if you're handling that, you have to be very careful, and this all falls under the GDPR regulations. In general, we can say that the GDPR has a significant impact on companies and also on their entire business model. I pointed out in the beginning that we as MHP, we support in adapting the processes and adapting IT systems when it comes to GDPR. And this is what you can see here in this page. Basically, a company needs to, on the one hand, think about the data they are handling. So what are they handling? They need to think about their data sources and need to take care that data minimization is being set in place, because we come to that in a bit, but because whenever you don't have a purpose and or a legal requirement to store the data, you should basically get rid of it. That's the rule of the data minimization. Processes. So the processes need to get adapted, data compliance processes, as well as your general processes in the company where you have touch points of collecting personal data. You have to look into those processes and adapt them, check the associated roles and responsibilities, and see how you need to change your processes to handle personal data more sensitively. Also, when it comes to resources, you need to think about how to allocate your additional resources that you might need in order to set the data compliance organization in place. You need to think about where to place those resources, how to organize that, also how to set up a governance structure, because this right is nothing that was now set in place 25th of May and we had a go live and that's about it. No, you have to make sure that you have your future process landscape in place as well, and future organization, and that everyone is continuously made aware and continuously adapts the company IT systems as well as processes, because you always have new processes and IT systems coming into place, and also they need to comply to GDPR. And last but not least, the IT structures, as said, so associated IT systems need to adapt it on the one hand to comply to data minimization rules, but also to set up certain rights that we've heard about, the right of deletion, etc. But we come to that in a bit. So as already stated, to avoid significant fines, really, you have to, as a company in Europe, and we will see also to a certain extent in the US, relate to the GDPR standards and keep up to date on your workflows to comply with GDPR standards. So in general, companies should already have a data protection management set in place. But now this data protection management area, or however that is organized in your company, has to take care of the different tasks related to GDPR as well. So I said it's important under GDPR that you have a dedicated purpose for using the data. Or you have a legitimate right to use the data. Maybe it's tax-related data, so there is a right, a regulation out there that allows you and even forces you to hold and collect the personal data. You have to be very transparent now on how you use personal data, where you store it, and as said, for which purposes you're using it. And you also need to be able to provide information on where you use the data. Validity and deletion, as said, after when there is no longer a purpose for using the data, you have to be able to delete the data. You have to set processes in place that do that. And or if you have a request from someone saying, oh, I want my data to get deleted, you have to be able to do that as well. Data minimization, we already touched base on a lot. In the past, it was all about just collecting data, harvesting it, and trying to make the best out of it when it comes to marketing usage, for example. But now it's really important that you have a dedicated purpose and consent to handle the data, to store the data. If you don't have that, you have to delete the data. Now let's have a quick look on how the GDPR affects US-based businesses. Because when I was asked to give some insights into GDPR in the first place, I thought, well, that's only a European right. No, it's not. And for sure, if a company collects personal data from someone from a EU country, that immediately makes your company subject to the GDPR, to the regulations. Also, if you collect the data in the EU but store it in the US, and we all know that this happens quite often, this makes you subject to GDPR. But for sure, GDPR only applies if the data subject, so the natural person you're collecting data from, is located in the EU. Important topic, we'll hear about that later too, is that you also inform your workforce about any of those rules. So with our customers, our clients, it's an important topic that we train the entire workforce on how data is handled, because we see that later every employee is affected and needs to take care of GDPR. And very important also the last point on this page. So I was asked in the past, okay, so yes, we are collecting data, but well, there's no financial transaction behind it. No. The mere handling, processing, and transferring or collecting the personal data is already sufficient of making you, respectively your company, subject to GDPR. We have, on this page, we are showing you two different use cases. And these two use cases show how well GDPR and or other rights are set into effect when it comes to handling data. So in the use case, in the first use case, basically, it's all about a company that is located in the US and collects personal data of EU citizens, and or also processes personal data of EU citizens for a company on behalf of a company in the EU. This is regulated under the so-called US Privacy Shield. So this is one regulation that allows you as a US-based company to handle data from the EU. The US Privacy Shield has been under discussion. There has been some adaptations to that regulation as well, but basically one can see when you are adhering to the US Privacy Shield regulations, you are fine when it comes to GDPR. There might be some exceptions to the rule, but this is what one can say in general. And the second example is also an important one, because I know that also a lot of German companies, Germany-based companies, and or European-based companies have, for sure, their subsidiaries in the US. So if you are in a group, if you're a group and you are transferring data between the subsidiaries, you have to adhere to corporate rules and need to check that your corporate rules and the special contracts that you've set in place apply to GDPR, or are set up in a way that they comply with GDPR. You should ideally then get in touch with your legal department and or get a legal advisor too, because there are certain new templates out there that you need to set up or need to set in place in order to handle data between subsidiaries and in order to comply with GDPR. So this is one big topic that companies need to adapt, is their, let's say, internal contracts of handling data between subsidiaries. So in the first chapter, as said, we heard about the GDPR in general, that media has had an increased attention on the whole topic, especially here in the EU, but for sure related to Google and Facebook also over in the US. We heard about the different groups of affected natural people, and that you can basically talk about customers and prospects as one group, suppliers as well as employees. We also heard about the significant fines that are out there, and we touched base on the US Privacy Shield. So let's look at the example of an OEM. And let's see how an OEM could organize itself when it comes to GDPR, and also how other companies or how companies are handling GDPR in general. So if you look into a company, you really have to, on the one hand, think about your data subjects and the rights of the data subjects, which you can see on the left side. Again, we heard about those. It's the right of information. It's the right of deletion, the right of data, getting your data ported to another place. And then the OEM or group has to set up certain processes and our IT systems. The brands on the right side also have to do certain things within their organization. On the top, you can see the governance topic, on the bottom, processes. So basically, in general, this is a set, not a one-time topic. So you have to have a governance in place. You have to have future processes in place. Also, your current processes need to get adapted. You have to adapt legal texts and contracts. You have to adapt the processes where personal data is collected. You also have to adapt your organization to a certain extent. And when it comes to what the OEM I'm talking about has set in place, basically they set in place processes and platforms to manage the record processing activities, and I will explain a bit what that really means. They have set up a process and system to handle customer requests and or requests of prospects when it comes to them wanting information about how their personal data is handled. And they also set up systems systems where suppliers and also employees can retrieve information about their personal data. And the brands then for sure need to adapt the processes, need to handle information requests that come that are handed over. And they also for sure have to make their employees aware about the whole topic. And employees, by employees I really mean everyone, because everyone is affected and needs to be aware that personal data is collected everywhere in the company and handled everywhere. So when it comes to setting up such a program or project, there are, say, 5 main areas that one should look at. The first one is the records of processing activities, it's called. It's basically regulated in the GDPR that all processes where personal data is handled need to get documented. There's a certain template out there that the legal basically that under this right need to be set up and provided on request. So this is the utmost important topic. You have to have an overview and be able to provide it all the time where you're handling personal data, what the processes are all about. This is very big and complex document, and this is, for example, for companies, this can be a huge effort to set it up in the first place, and the next challenge is to also keep it up to date. But this is important, and if you don't have that, you're already making yourself or getting your company into danger so that you potentially have to pay the fines we talked about. Then we have the deletion process that is very important. As said, one right is the right of being forgotten or deletion. So in all your systems, apps, documents, even emails, you have to be able to identify personal data and also be able to delete personal data. I always give the example of a newsletter, for example. So if someone says, oh yeah, I once requested to get your newsletter, but I no longer want that newsletter. So you should have, ideally, an automated process that helps you to delete the person's email address and make sure that the person no longer gets your newsletter if the person requested the right of deletion in that case. Because if the newsletter would be sent another time to the person, this is already a data breach, and then this could make you, this could force you to pay the fine. Then handling information requests. As said, every natural person is allowed to get information on how their personal data is handled, where it is stored, and how it is used. So whenever someone requests this information, the company needs to be able to provide from the respective data sources an overview on which data is handled, which data is stored, and for what reason. Then there are certain other measures that companies have, that a company has on their plate in order to comply with GDPR. So there is, I was talking earlier about handling data between subsidiaries and also with external parties. You might have marketing agencies that are working with you. Then you have to adapt your general data processing contracts. Very important point is also the declaration of consent. As we heard earlier, natural person has to give their consent that you are allowed to handle their respective personal data. So these documents of giving consent, for example, giving consent that, yes, I allow you to use my data for marketing purposes, these consent declarations need to get adapted. And there are companies out there, and you might have received such emails as well, that in general said, have sent you a request and said, well, if you still want to receive marketing information from our company, please click here and provide us with your consent that we are allowed to handle your personal data. A lot of companies did that because they realized that they either don't have any consent in place or that they have old templates in use that were not broad enough. And about data portability, privacy by design, there are way more topics that need to get implemented within companies in order to comply with GDPR. Last but not least, the governance topic. I already touched base on that, and we will see also the governance topic on a separate page in a bit. But in general, you have to have as a company your future process landscape in place when it comes to GDPR. There are certain processes, especially the data breach process, that need to be set in place by companies. So for these three main areas, I have some more detailed slides which allow you a little bit more insight. So I mentioned the register of processing activities. So according to the GDPR regulation, it's relevant as a company to have this register of processing activities. It's basically a certain template that the supervisory authority has set in place and that has to be submitted on demand to the supervisory authority. And what is that all about? It's an overview of the activities, processes that you as a company have in place where you handle and or collect personal data. And this is nothing that you do only one time. So this needs to be set in place and also kept up to date all the time, which already shows you that governance processes are of a big relevance. And in case you are not providing this to the authorities and or natural person requesting it, there are the fines we already talked about, 4% of worldwide annual sales. There is for sure the reputational damage that you as a company have in case it's reported that you are not complying to GDPR. And for sure also the board members are personally also liable in case there is a non-compliance with the legal requirements here. So that's why for the 25th of May, with all our clients, that was one of the main tasks to set up this register of processing activities. Then let's have a look into the topic of information requests. So as I said earlier, this is here the example of an OEM, but as I said earlier, the information right is one of the, let's say, one of the biggest rights, or for some companies, one of the most complex ones, where basically a customer and or prospect or any natural person can request information on how their personal data is handled, where it is stored, for what reason it is used. And the two cases we show here, we show because we want to outline that in case you are working within a group in the EU, basically the overall legal person, so the central legal person, is the company who needs to provide the information to the people, to the natural people requesting it. So if you have different brands, different markets, etc., under your group umbrella, if the data subject, so the customer or the prospect, sends an information request to the corporation, and then all the companies belonging to the corporation need to provide information, and one centralized information report is being sent back. So that also means that whenever you set up processes within your company, for sure, the corporation should set up central concepts and apply them to all the brands and markets, etc. And on the right side, the second case shows you that, for example, if you're talking, and on the left side, we're talking about an OEM corporation, yes, an automotive company. On the right side, we're talking about a dealership. So a dealership itself usually is a single legal or a separate legal person, or can be a separate legal person. If that's the case, if the OEM is requested, the dealership doesn't fall under this umbrella. So if a customer and a prospect wants information on their personal data from a dealership, they have to request it from that legal person, so from the dealership. And thereby you can already see that these are two different processes or two different landscapes that you're basically setting up. Because a requester always contacts a legal person, and a legal person needs to reply back. So when it comes to handling information requests, I've put up an example here of an OEM who basically has set into place a contact center team who supports the handling of such information requests. So the contact center team has access to all the IT systems and or data sources. And that's important to say. We are not only talking IT systems when it comes to information requests. We are also talking Excel lists, etc. We will see that in a bit. So the contact center team has access to all those data sources and can extract then the relevant information from the IT systems and send the information report back to the requester, to the customer. And the basically branch or departments have to support in a certain way when it comes to questions and or comes to deletions that need to be done. But in general, this OEM has decided to set up a central team, a central operations team that helps to comply with GDPR and provide customers with information reports about their personal data. I mentioned the topic of governance. Here you can see an example governance landscape which shows you the different future processes that need to be set in place in order to comply with GDPR also beyond 25th of May. So you can see that general audits will take place. There is the important process of incident management, which we will dive into in a bit. Basically, training needs to be provided on a regular basis whenever you have new employees and or changes within the law. Contract management as well as consent management are important processes that need to be set in place, because whenever you have new contracts, they need to comply to the GDPR rules, and our old contracts need to be adapted. And contracts, that means contracts with your suppliers, contracts with in the group, contracts with marketing agencies, etc. Okay, we wanted to have a look into different companies and how they handle GDPR in a different way. I will here only touch base on the one you see on the bottom, which is basically a screenshot from the Volkswagen website. So one example, Volkswagen here. So if you go onto the webpage of Volkswagen, you can see how they have set up their the GDPR, how they handle GDPR, and what they have set in place so far. Basically, they comply with GDPR by providing externals, which means on the one hand customers and also prospects, employees, as well as suppliers, with one central website or sub-site where they can retrieve information about data protection and how Volkswagen handles data protection. As said, they have divided the process into 3 different affected groups. And if you click on these areas, you can see how they handle the different groups in different ways. So customers and prospects can request information for sure, as well as employees and suppliers. But the company steers through these 3 different categories. On the website, the company steers these 3 different groups in a different way. So the processes behind it are slightly different. And through this website, you can basically steer requests. You make it very transparent for the end user how they can retrieve information and or request a deletion and get information. Yeah, this is just a quick one on how Volkswagen handles that whole topic. As said, we were deep diving into how such a typical project looks like, what the main topics are in such a project that relates to GDPR. Just you need to set up a register of processing activities. You have to have a deletion process in place, and you have to handle information requests. So in the last chapter, in the last few minutes, I want to show you how every employee is affected. Different roles and responsibilities have to be in place. Every employee needs to consider how to handle personal data, and also data breach is a very important process that needs to be set in place within a company. So 4 different roles one can differentiate when it comes to GDPR within a company. As said, the board overall is responsible. The management needs to make sure that their employees are informed, and they also need to ensure that the GDPR requirements are implemented. Every employee needs to protect their own workspace. And on the right side, the products and owners and key users are basically people that are people who have a certain role within that governance landscape that we saw earlier, and who need to support, for example, the editing, the deletion, adaptation of contracts, etc., hands-on. So on the next few pages, we have listed some examples of everyday personal data. When it comes to employee data, very often companies have birthday lists and coffee lists in place. And yes, those are of relevance for GDPR, because you also need a consent of your employees in order to handle this data. Ideally, you should have the data limitation or minimization right in mind and not store as much information as you want to. Yeah, you can see here, that's just a glimpse into how also your employees have a right of knowing where you handle their data, and you should, as a company, restrict the collection of personal data. For sure, when it comes to minutes, attendance lists, also driver logbooks, or any other documentation that contain personal data, again, data limitation and minimization is important. whenever you have a purpose or when it's necessary for your general work activities that you document personal data, then it's okay. Yeah? Then you have to also document that in that register that we discussed earlier. You have to have a purpose, or when the purpose is no longer there, after the retention period has expired, you have to delete the personal data also when it comes to minutes, etc. So what a lot of our clients do, they have certain data storages in place where people can upload data and also classify the data so that the data gets a certain timestamp, and after that timestamp, where basically the purpose is no longer there, the data is being deleted automatically. Oops, sorry. And photographs as well as for example, sending newsletters is an important topic. So whenever you take employee photos or when you send newsletters to your customers, always think about the consent topic. I mentioned that earlier on. In the past, we didn't think about taking pictures of events from when it comes to our employees and or when it comes to our customers or prospects that are attending trade fairs, etc. But now you have to think about the consent first, and you have to have a purpose of use in order to be allowed to use the photo and also sending the newsletter. When it comes to letters, mail, business cards, or telephone, you also have to have the GDPR back in mind. Purpose of use is the main thing that I can mention here. You always have to have a purpose of use. If you have that, ideally, you also should think about the statutory or legal retention period. If that period is over, delete the data. That's the safest thing. And if I say deletion, that also means you can basically anonymize the data. That works as well. So if you get rid of the name, the email address, etc., you can for sure still use the data, for example, for reporting reasons. But you have to make sure that if you no longer have a purpose of use, that you cannot transfer it back to identifying a person behind the data. So if you have no longer a legal base for keeping the data, delete it and anonymize it. Business cards, for sure you can take business cards, and you have the person who gave the business card to you, gave it to you because of a certain purpose, because he or she wanted, for example, a contract and or an offer. As long as you have that purpose of use in place, you can keep the business card. If you don't have a written consent, you should, after that, delete the data. So always make sure you have a consent when storing data. And also over the phone, people handle unknowingly personal data and also provide data to other parties without thinking about it that much. GDPR makes you think about it. You should really think about, does the other party have a right to get to know the data, and also what is the reason for the other party to get the data and use it. So if you are, for example, handling business data with a marketing agency, make sure you have the proper contract in place. There are some general practical tips for data protection everyone should know, like please don't leave your workstation and your screen unlocked and unattended. These are all general topics every one of us should already know, but for sure this also is related to GDPR, because by doing or not doing stuff like this, you can easily lose your personal data. And you want to make sure that this doesn't happen. Because if that happens, what you have to have in place as a company is your so-called data breach process. A very important process that the Data Protection Authority also wants every company to have that in place. So if you assume that there is a data breach, like personal data gets lost, USB stick got lost, or a printout got lost somewhere with personal data, then you have to report the incident as soon as possible, latest within 72 hours, and also inform the affected data subject immediately. We all know about some press reports where companies had to do that. That's why companies are obliged to set this process into place, where in the first place, every employee should report a data breach as soon as he or she expects one, and also then the internal processes need to is it relevant that the data protection authority is informed, and is it also necessary that the data subjects or the affected people are informed. So I will skip this page, which shows the data breach process I just explained in a little more detail, but it's an important process that really needs to be set in place by companies. I mentioned earlier the Volkswagen website as one example, and you can see here again the three groups: customer, prospects, suppliers, and employees, and how a company, a client needs or has set up the handling of personal data for these three different groups in a different way. Basically, all GDPR rights when it comes to customers and prospects need to get implemented. So when a customer or prospect wants deletion, wants information request on personal data, or needs to provide consent, you have to have proper IT systems and processes and templates in place. Same is valid for suppliers. So the natural person, the personal data of a supplier, so Mr. X working at company Y, is allowed to get from you as a company information which data you are storing about this person. It's not relevant that if company X asks you which data do you have, this is not personal data or natural person, this would not fall under GDPR. Only the personal data or the natural person falls under that. And also employees, as said, employees can request their employer, can request which personal data the employer holds about them. These were the key facts of the last chapter, which showed that every employee is affected. And I now want to provide you with some space to ask your questions. And also, if you have not been able to ask your question, you will see our contact data after that in a bit. And we are happy to take your questions and answer them back to the group afterwards. Questions? And I think then we now have to enable everyone again to unmute. I think you can also push *6 in case you have a question, and or you can also write it to me. That I will also show here our contact details. Again, we are happy to take your questions also via email and a phone for sure. You can get in touch with us and also the GACC team, Rafaela, and they're happy to forward your questions to us, and we will then touch base with you.
Katja?
Yes.
I have actually a question. How you filter out all this information from a company?
How do you mean filter out? So basically in a project, when we as MHP work on a project related to GDPR, what we do is we look into the IT systems and the processes a company has or holds. And we try to figure out the, let's say, touch points where personal data is being handled. So by doing this from two sides, which means on the one hand, screening the IT systems and the data that is collected there. And on the other hand, looking at the processes, we make sure that we get the most, or we find the most detailed information. Because if you only get in touch with a company and say, okay, tell me, where do you handle personal data? Usually companies are having a big question mark and don't really know where to start.
Yeah, I probably contact you later per email because I have like few more questions about that whole thing. And yeah, I think I don't want to waste anybody's time, but I will probably email you later.
Feel free. As said, either email your questions to us, or we are also happy to have a short telephone conference with you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks.
You're welcome. Alrighty, then as said, I give you the chance. I keep this screen open for a while so that you can copy our data, our personal data, which is fine because there is a purpose. The purpose is informing you about GDPR, so it's perfectly fine. You have the consent of both of us to handle the data. All right.
We don't call me.
All right. I think we have no more questions at this point. Feel free to get in touch with us. Thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully talk to you afterwards. And I wish you a very nice day today. Your day starts.